In this lesson, we're going to cover the topic of acquisition and procurement. Now, acquisition and procurement are terms that are often used interchangeably, but they do have a distinctly different meaning that you really need to understand. Now, acquisition is simply the process of obtaining goods and services. By procurement, on the other hand, we're talking about things that are referring to the entire process of sourcing and obtaining those goods and services, including all the processes that lead up to the actual acquisition. So let's pretend that you're working for a multinational corporation and your department needs to purchase a new piece of software to better manage its interactions with your clients. Now, you can't just go online and buy the software you want, even if you have a company credit card, because most large organizations are going to have a structured process in place to be able to ensure the right decisions are being made, that your budgets are being adhered to, and that your overall security isn't going to be compromised when you install that piece of software. So, to conduct the acquisition and procurement process, we first need to understand the different types of purchase options that an organization might utilize, including a company credit card, an individual purchase, or the use of a purchase order. Now, many organizations allow their employees to use a company credit card to make minor purchases on behalf of the organization. These purchases are generally good for low-cost items that must be purchased very quickly. For example, if you need more ink or toner or paper for your printers, using a company credit card would be a great option for that. Now, each company is going to set their own transaction limits and specify the type of items that can be purchased using that company credit card. For example, here at Dion Training, there's only a few of us who have a company credit card. And depending on our role in the company, we have different limits that each employee can use when they're making a purchase, and how much money they can spend without having to go through a different procurement process. Next, we have an individual purchase option. Now, an individual purchase is commonly used in organizations when an individual will purchase something, and that person is the employee, making that purchase on behalf of the company, and then they go and seek reimbursement for the purchase they made. Now, this option is sometimes used when the employee doesn't have their own company credit card, but they still need to make a purchase of a small item pretty quickly, or if the organization finds itself in an emergency situation. Often, this will be done when an employee is asked to do travel on behalf of the company, but has not been issued a travel credit card for that purpose. So they'll use their own credit card, they'll make their purchases for things like flights and hotels and rental cars and gas and food and things like that. And then at the end of the trip, they'll bring all the receipts to their accounting department, and then they'll get a check back or a direct deposit for the amount they spent. Now, another example of using this kind of an individual reimbursement policy is when an organization doesn't have its own company credit card yet. For example, I recently started a new company and we don't have a credit card for that company yet because it's so new. And so when I made new purchases for that company, I was using my personal credit card and then I was reimbursed from the company for those purchases. Now, in this case, that company actually wrote me a check and then I put that in my bank account to pay off my credit card bill. But again, this is what we're talking about when we talk about an individual purchase. It's when an individual, like an employee, makes the purchase and then they're reimbursed for that purchase by the company. Now, the final option we have for purchasing is the use of a purchase order. Now, if you're going to buy something that's larger or more expensive, your company may require the use of a purchase order, and this is usually referred to simply as a PO. Now, a purchase order or a PO is simply a formal document that's issued by the purchasing department that authorizes a specific purchase. For example, at Dion Training, we work with a lot of large companies who are buying training for 25 or 50 or 500 employees at one time. And in those cases, they usually will issue us a purchase order that is signed by their financial department, and they provide that to us as their form of payment. Now, that purchase order itself isn't actually a payment though. It's just a promise that says they are financially obligated to pay us for the amount of that purchase order, and this makes us be able to collect that money based on the terms of the payment, like net 15, net 30, or net 60, which indicates how many days they have to actually send us that physical check or to send us the money electronically to cover the amount of that purchase order within 15, 30, or 60 days, according to the master service agreement that we have in place with that specific company. Now, before the purchase can be made, especially when you're dealing with hardware or software purchases, your organization may have an internal approval process in place that you have to follow. The use of this approval process for purchases is there to ensure that the purchase aligns with the company's goals and needs, and that there's enough money in the budget allocated for that purchase, as well as making sure the security and compatibility of that product is going to work with the company's existing infrastructure. Once that has all been properly assessed, we can then authorize that purchase. For example, I used to work for the United States Navy, and they have a very rigorous process known as the ITPR process, or the Information Technology Procurement Request process. Before any hardware or software could be purchased by anyone in the US Navy, a detailed assessment of the need and benefits of that software or hardware had to be conducted. Then, the product is checked against the Navy's information technology standards for security and interoperability with their current systems, And then finally, a review of the organization's budget allocation and source of funding is also going to be verified. Once all of that is done and all the evaluations are successfully conducted, then we can have a formal request that's going to be initiated that goes all the way up through multiple levels of approval by the organization's senior decision makers before we can actually undertake that purchase. Now, after your organization's internal approval process is completed, you can then procure the software or hardware. At this point, another set of processes is going to begin that includes assessing the compatibility of the product with your current systems, carrying out security checks and configurations, conducting proper training for your end users on how to use the new product, and integrating that product into your organization's existing workflows. So remember, acquisition and procurement involves more than just buying something. Acquisition and procurement are structured processes that are designed to ensure the financial prudence, operational efficiency, and increased levels of security for your organization's enterprise network are being achieved. Whether it's using a company credit card for an immediate need, seeking individual reimbursement, or following a stringent approval process like the United States Navy ITPR process, acquisition and procurement is all about making the right decisions in the best interest of your organization. Every organization, based on its size, nature, and requirements, will have its own unique acquisition and procurement processes. But what remains consistent across all of them is an emphasis on a structured, secure, and efficient procurement practice that you're going to be utilizing.